Now, detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The 7 mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Coming to you on a recorded line. Can you hear me okay? I get so many of those phone calls, I just wanted to see what it would sound like to say it myself. This is the best of the View from the Bunkers. We dig into the archives for another best of program to cover the time while we are away. Tonight, a program that will make you angry. In America, the most vulnerable among us should be the ones we protect. Our homes, our churches, our schools should be the ultimate safe spaces for children. And that is often not the case. And even more infuriatingly, sometimes those who perpetrate this evil of victimizing the youngest and the weakest get away scot-free. That's the subject of our archive programs tonight. I'm Derek Gilbert, digging into the archives to bring out a couple of programs that have not been streamed to the web since, 2010, if memory serves. First, the boilerplate self-promotion to get things out of the way. We appreciate you listening wherever and whenever you are at Spreaker.com, iHeartRadio, Stitcher.com, Spotify.com, or if you're listening at the player at the website, vftb.net. We thank you for making time in your schedule to give us a listen. You can subscribe to the podcast. That makes it easy to guarantee that you'll hear every program that comes out from our humble studio here. Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, both with subscription options. You can subscribe at Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify. It's all free. Or you can just follow the links. Use one of the links at vftb.net. We make it easy. Just click one of those buttons and select the podcatcher of your choice to download the audio directly to your smartphone, tablet, or desktop machine. Of course, you can just, if you want to take us with you, download our free mobile app. We got an iOS app that works on iTunes, at the iTunes App Store, that is, for iPhone, iPad, iPod Touch. We've got the same at Google Play for Android phones and tablets. The website, of course, vftb.net. That's your basic acronym for View from the Bunker. And all this audio gets shipped over to YouTube and the YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Derek Gilbert. Social media sites, View from the Bunker at facebook.com, on Twitter at View from Bunker or at Derek Gilbert, and at oneway.com, a new Christian social media site. You'll find me there under the handle at Derek P. Gilbert. The abuse of children for physical gratification by adults is despicable. It is absolutely horrendous. I have no sympathy whatsoever for perpetrators of child sexual abuse. That's one of the reasons that Sharon and I came to work with Tom and Nita Horn at SkyWatchTV. If you're not familiar with the ministry of Whispering Ponies Ranch, I won't go through it all here, but if you ever watch SkyWatchTV and wonder why we devote so much time to promoting various books and DVDs, it's because all of the money raised through those above and beyond cost, all the money raised through the sales of books and DVDs finances the operations at Whispering Ponies Ranch, which was intended essentially, originally, that is, to work with Royal Family Kids, a ministry devoted to children in foster care between the ages of 9 and 12. It's a week-long camping experience that is intended to show them that there are adults out there who take our responsibilities as adults and our relationship with children seriously as protectors. Adults who want nothing from children except to love them. And these are children who are at much greater risk. Look up the statistics on children in foster care sometime. Much greater risk of drugs, alcohol abuse, child pornography, prostitution, gangs, prison, early death. It's a bleak future for many of the children in foster care. And Royal Family Kids is helping to change the odds for a number of them. And what we do at SkyWatch TV is so that Royal Family Kids doesn't have to pay a dime to bring children to Whispering Ponies Ranch. You can find out more at whisperingponiesranch.com. So we'll get right into the program. 2 programs tonight from the early days of View from the Bunker. One dealing with a scandal that if you've not heard of, because it's like anything else in the news, it attracts a lot of attention for a while, and then it fades from view and gets forgotten. This goes back almost 30 years now. Involves some of the biggest names in American politics from my early adulthood. But it needs to be remembered because there were no prosecutions. There were people who died and others who did wind up in prison for daring to speak out against the powerful and paid a price for it. I'm talking about the Franklin scandal. The Franklin Credit Union in Omaha, Nebraska was the center of some very dark deeds, and it involved some very powerful men in the Republican Party back in the 1980s. Culminated, and this was reported by the Washington Times, the conservative newspaper in Washington, D.C., reporting on a midnight tour being granted to young boys, early teens, by a known male escort. A homosexual male escort taking young boys on a tour of the White House living quarters at midnight during the George H.W. Bush administration. How does that happen? Unless you've got very powerful connections. That's an offshoot of the Franklin cover-up. We talked to the author of a book called The Franklin Scandal back in November 2010, Nick Bryant.
But now, a look at one of the most disturbing incidents in American history. About 25 years ago, an investigation into financial impropriety at the Franklin Community Credit Union in Omaha almost turned into something much bigger. I say almost because when investigators began looking into accusations of horrific child abuse and pedophilia, accusations that included some very powerful and wealthy people at the highest levels of American politics, they were shut down. And at least in one case, shut down with extreme prejudice. Our guest is an investigative journalist whose writing lately has focused on the plight of disadvantaged children in the United States. His book is the product of a 7-year investigation into what happened in Omaha back in the 1980s and why most of us have never heard of it. The book is The Franklin Scandal, published by Trine Day, and it's our honor to welcome author Nick Bryant to the program. Nick, thank you for joining us tonight.
Well, I'm glad to be here tonight, Derek.
The Franklin Scandal. To set the tone for the hour, in a nutshell, in broad terms, what is the Franklin Scandal?
The Franklin Scandal is about an interstate pedophile network that flew children from coast to coast and pandered them to the rich and powerful. Blackmail was deployed against the rich and the powerful. I think the pedophile network, we're not talking about a ring, we're talking about a transcontinental network that was in operation for, I think, approximately about 10 years. And the front for the pedophile network was the Franklin Credit Union in Omaha, Nebraska, which you had mentioned earlier in your introduction. And Lawrence E. King, who was a Republican booster and big shot, was the general manager of the Franklin Credit Union. And in 1988, the Franklin Credit Union was raided, and it was supposed to be a credit union for lower socioeconomic people in North Omaha, and economically oppressed and depressed part of Omaha, North Omaha. And it was supposed to have approximately $2.5 million. But the feds discovered that $40 million was missing. And Lawrence E. King was charged with embezzlement and fraud and a myriad of other financial improprieties. But he wasn't charged with a single count of child abuse, even though some children had come forward previously. Social services had alerted both federal and state law enforcement that Lawrence E. King that they had information that Lawrence E. King was running an interstate pedophile network. And a victim came forward to the Omaha Police Department who said that she had been exploited in a network that Lawrence E. King was part of. And but these allegations and accusations went absolutely nowhere. But what ultimately happened when the feds disclosed that there was $40 million missing from the Franklin Credit Union, some very concerned Nebraska state senators formed a subcommittee, because when they found out that Franklin had $40 million in it, which is about $40 million had been embezzled from Franklin, which is about $37.5 more million than the credit union should have had, and that it hadn't been audited, they were concerned. Other savings and loans in Nebraska had gone belly up, and the senators kind of felt like there was some kind of endemic banking corruption within the system of within the state of Nebraska. So they formed what was called the Franklin Committee to look at the various financial improprieties around the Franklin Credit Union. And shortly after they formed, social services, high-ranking social services personnel came to them, and they told the senators that financial crimes were just part of the story behind the Franklin Credit Union, that Lawrence E. King was reportedly running an interstate transcontinental pedophile network, providing children to very rich and powerful individuals. So the senators started to look at that angle too, and then that's when Pandora's box got opened up, and a lot of really heinous miscarriage of justice has happened. A number of suspicious suicides happened, and on and on and on and on. So that's basically the Franklin credits, the story in a nutshell.
Well, we'll get into some of the specifics here and give an example of some of the accusations that were made, some of the evidence to support those accusations, and why they seem to go no place. But backing up just a step, Nick, how did you tumble onto this story?
It's very strange. I was looking, I was going to write a story on the occult for a mainstream magazine, and I came across a document, a U.S. Customs report on a cult called the Finders that was reportedly trafficking children. Mm-hmm. And the U.S. Customs got involved because the D.C. Police and Tallahassee Police Departments got involved. And there were a couple of finders that were busted in Tallahassee Park with 6 children who were in really, really bad shape. Their ages ranged from about 2 to 7. And what happened was the CIA completely quashed the investigation. It says that right there in the U.S. Customs report, that the CIA is taking over this investigation. So ultimately, the 6 kids were taken into protective custody, and they were given back to the cult, and the 2 cult members who had multiple counts of child abuse charges leveled against them. And even Tallahassee personnel said that at least one of the children showed signs of sexual abuse, and a cache of pornography was found in the Finders' headquarters. So when the CIA completely put the kibosh on it and the kids were given back to the cult, and the 2 guys, the 2 Finders, were let out of jail and all their charges were dropped, I thought to myself, well, whoa. I mean, what the hell is the CIA doing, quashing an investigation into some very strange people that are seemingly doing very heinous things to children? I mean, what is going on here? And so had I not come across that document, it wouldn't have opened my mind to the possibility of like a Franklin. But once I came across that document, I started trolling the internet.
This was a story that was picked up and reported by U.S. News and World Report.
It was. The Finders story, and some really hideous things that came out about their headquarters in Washington, D.C.
Essentially, the authorities found purchase orders for children from other parts of the world.
Well, actually, they found some documentation that the finders were purchasing a couple of kids in China.
Yeah. And the CIA came down on this and basically stopped the investigation. So this began to, lend credibility to some of these conspiracy theories that you found on the net?
Well, it certainly opened my mind to the possibility that the CIA was perhaps involved in some pretty heinous things domestically, which, I mean, shouldn't be the case. I mean, the CIA shouldn't be operating domestically at all. So that opened up my mind to the possibility that the CIA could be aiding and abetting other child trafficking networks. And if you read my book, The Franklin Scandal, I show that the FBI and the Justice Department went into a full court press to cover up this pedophile network, and I make a pretty strong case that there was some CIA affiliation too. So through one of the pedophile, there were two pedophilic pimps that ran this pedophile network, and one of them was I have from multiple sources was a CIA asset.
Well, let's get into some of the threads here. This is really a convoluted story, and I know we're only going to barely scratch the surface of the course of this hour as we talk with Nick Bryant on A View from the Bunker, the book, The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal. How did the authorities become aware of what was going on around the Franklin Community Credit Union? I mean, besides the improprieties, I mean, the $40 million was kind of a tip-off, but, what about the other stuff?
Well, what happened was in 1986, a girl who was taken out of a really abusive foster home. I mean, this was a very abusive foster home. I mean, I get into it. I've got tomes of social service documents about this foster home. And this girl was taken out of this foster home. There were approximately 8 kids there, and they were all heavily abused. This girl, the first girl that came forward, had been molested by her foster father, starting at the ages of, I think, about 9 or so. And she ultimately, the foster parents ultimately pimped her out to this pedophile network, and she was flown to various cities to take part in which were described as pedophilic orgies. And she was taken out of this foster care home in 1986, and she slowly developed a certain amount of trust towards her new foster mother, who was a very kind and loving woman. And she ultimately told her foster mother about what had happened. And her foster mother was kind of appalled because her foster mother had seen what had gone on in this foster care home with the child abuse. I mean, years of child abuse, and no one was ever prosecuted. And the authorities had all the evidence, but no one was ever prosecuted. So the foster care mother went to a friend of hers who worked at Boys Town, who was a youth worker at Boys Town, because the girl that came forward said that Boys Town kids were part of this pedophile network and that they had been flown around.
Boys Town, as in Father Flanagan Boys Town, Bing Crosby, and all that? As
in Father Flanagan's Boys Town, yes. Spencer Tracy, actually, not Bing Crosby.
Spencer Tracy, my mistake. Right.
But, so the youth worker wrote a 40-page report to brief the kid over 3 sessions, and the kid was very honest and provided a tremendous amount of detail. And but those allegations went nowhere. And a couple of years later, another kid would come forward. I mean, these are documented cases of, and the police, the Omaha Police Department, made a report, a couple of reports about her allegations of being used for pornography and molested. And that went nowhere either, even though the police officer that interviewed her found her to be credible. So And then other accounts of this pedophile network had slowly drifted up to other social services personnel. So there were social services personnel that were aware of this, and they had actually written to the state attorney general and also the U.S. attorney, and had requested that these allegations be investigated. But they were simply ignored. No law enforcement entity looked into these allegations whatsoever. So when this committee, the Franklin Committee of these senators, formed to look into these financial improprieties, these social services personnel went to the senators and they said, you've got to take a look at this child abuse, because we think that a lot of kids have been destroyed by this network. So that's when the real investigation started into the child abuse.
What again was the link between the abused children and Lawrence E. King at the Franklin Community Credit Union?
Well, he was the one that flew them around. He was the one that provided them with money. And according to the kids, he was the one that provided them with money, provided them with drugs, and flew them around. And I've got about 175 of his flight receipts. And none of the flight receipts have passenger manifests, but a lot of the flight receipts go to a house in Washington, D.C. that was wired for audio and visual blackmail. And that house was owned by a CIA asset named Craig Spence.
Ah, okay. We'll talk about him a little bit more in just a few minutes. So what is Lawrence King's background? Where did he come from, and how did he rise to the position that he did?
Well, that's all very nebulous. He came from a lower socioeconomic background. Omaha was kind of the epicenter of the meat packaging industry, and Lawrence E. King's origins are very, very humble. His dad worked at a meat packaging plant, and he grew up in a lower socioeconomic part of Omaha, went to a public high school, and supposedly went to pre-med and then ultimately joined the Air Force. And then when he came back from the Air Force, he worked at a bank for a while, and then he was made manager of the Franklin Credit Union. So that's kind of his background in a nutshell.
Now, you document in the book that, in his history, basically he took over the credit union after it was offered to his father. But how did he get from running a credit union that was, essentially failing when he took it over, to driving very exclusive, expensive sports cars and living in a mansion overlooking the Missouri River? How did he avoid being audited during all of this? I mean, who was protecting him?
Well, I mean, he was protected when you look at the tremendous amount of power that was deployed to cover up this pedophile network. I mean, we're talking about the Department of Justice, we're talking about the FBI, we're talking about the Secret Service. I mean, we're talking about the pinnacle of law enforcement in the United States was involved in covering up the dirty deeds of Lawrence E. King. Mm-hmm. So he was obviously playing by different rules that were made, that were given almost exclusively to him. And, and when you read my book, you'll see in the Washington, D.C. section that these parties included some very wealthy and powerful people. And I think that Lawrence E. King served a very major function in providing these wealthy and powerful people with children. And so he was protected.
Well, clearly he was, to get away with what he did for so long. The thing that still boggles my mind, and I've been reading about the Franklin scandal off and on for some years now, but how he got into a position of supplying this product, for lack of a better term, to these wealthy and powerful people. It's not like, say, becoming a carpenter where you go through an apprenticeship or anything like that. how did he make these connections with these people who eventually protected him?
That's a good question. It's difficult to know. I've got some theories on that, but it's something that I didn't speculate about in the book, and I don't really feel comfortable speculating about it on the radio. But suffice it to say, he did end up with those connections, and where he was providing the rich and powerful with children and being protected by the upper echelon of federal law enforcement.
We're discussing the Franklin Scandal, the new book from, relatively new book by Nick Bryant, released by Trying Day on A View from the Bunker. Lawrence King, he was well-connected enough that he actually sang the national anthem to open up the Republican National Convention in 1984, held a huge party in Dallas at the South Fork Ranch. So obviously he rose above just being prominent in Omaha, Nebraska. He had national connections. What was he involved in Washington, D.C.?
Well, he rented a very large, very nice townhouse right off of Embassy Row in Washington, D.C. And he threw a lot of parties. I mean, Bob Kemp is on his guest list. Clarence Thomas is on his guest lists. There's one of the Buffetts is on his guest list. I mean, Hal Dobb, U.S. Congressman from Omaha, Nebraska, is on his guest list. I mean, there's a lot of powerful people that took part in King's rise to the top.
So what were some of the allegations of the children who came forward against Larry King? What happened to them? What were they made to do?
They were... Well, Shanetta Moore was the second kid that came forward. Ulysses Washington was the first, and she said that she had to go to orgies, and Shanetta Moore said that she had to partake in child pornography and was molested. And she'd actually seen some kids that had been murdered. And then 4 other kids came forward, and they all talked about very sadistic pedophilic orgies. Some of these power broker pedophiles were very, very sadistic to these kids. Most of the kids talked about being treated very sadistically.
How old were these children when they were forced to participate in these things?
The youngest one I talked to was 12 when he said that he started participating. But I have heard accounts of kids younger than 12 participating in this pedophile network. So, but the youngest one that I talked to said he was 12 years old when he first participated. And
where would King allegedly procure these children for these pedophiles?
He got some kids out of foster care. The first kid that came forward was out of foster care. A number of the kids that came who I talked to were from Boys Town, and a number of other kids were just marginalized teenagers that kind of fell through the cracks and got involved in drugs, and were easy to exploit at that point.
What happened to the kids who came forward?
Well, there were ultimately 6 kids that came forward. The FBI went into a full-court press, and they brutalized any kids that did come forward. But there were 6 kids that summoned the temerity to come forward. The first 2, Shanetta Moore and Ulysses Washington, ultimately what happened was the Franklin Committee had an investigator. This committee of senators had an investigator. And the first investigator quit, and they hired a second investigator named Gary Caradori. Mm-hmm. And he was a really remarkable investigator, really remarkable. And he coaxed 4 other kids to come forward. So ultimately now you've got 6 kids that have come forward. And they're naming a lot of the same perpetrators, and they're all naming Lawrence E. King. and 5 of them are talking about being flown around on planes, private planes, and they're repeatedly corroborating each other. So there was a grand jury. Now, the FBI got 2 of the kids to recant, and in the book I talk quite a bit about the pressure that was put on 2 of the kids, but 4 of them didn't recant. But when I really get into, I acquired all the sealed testimony, or the vast majority of the sealed testimony and documentation from the grand jury, or one of the grand juries that was used to cover up Franklin. There were ultimately 3 grand juries. There were 2 in Nebraska, a state and a federal, and then there was a federal grand jury in D.C. that covered it up. And but the 2 kids that Gary Caradori, what happened was Gary Caradori videotaped his interviews, and he eventually acquired almost 30 hours of videotaped interviews of the 4 kids that he coaxed to come forward. And the tapes were given to the Nebraska Attorney General and also the U.S. Attorney for the District of Nebraska. And the senators also let ranking law enforcement officials watch the tapes. So ultimately, the toothpaste came out of the tube. They had to act. So they decided, both the state and the federal judiciaries decided to hold grand juries, which were complete shams. I mean, I really show what a sham the state grand jury was. That ultimately declared that all the child abuse allegations were a quote-unquote carefully crafted hoax. So they're saying that these drug-addled kids concocted this carefully crafted hoax that sucked in all these senators and this really intelligent investigator and all these people in social services personnel, I mean, it was completely ludicrous. I mean, and I show it in my book.
In other words, all the documentation that was prepared by the social services people and by the investigators and the senators who believed the testimony of these kids, the grand jury said that they had just been sucked in by these kids?
By these kids. Yeah. That actually 3 of the kids had devised this carefully crafted hoax. And in my book, I show how that couldn't have possibly happened because they were geographically separated. But anyway, 2 kids were ultimately, 2 kids that refused to recant. There were 4 kids that came forward with investigator Caradori. 2 recanted and 2 refused to recant. And the girl that didn't recant, Alicia Owen, was indicted on 8 counts of perjury. So she was looking at 160 years in prison with those 8 counts. And then the boy that refused to recant was indicted on 3 counts of perjury. So he was only looking at merely 60 years in prison.
And that was Paul Bonacci?
Paul Bonacci, yes.
Yeah. It's almost mind-boggling. The kids who had the courage to come forward and stand by their stories, in the response to their courage, they were turned on by the Justice Department. The justice system should have protected them.
The Justice Department, both state and federal, just shredded them. They were just shredded. And it's quite easy. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the machinations of grand juries, but in a grand jury, a special prosecutor is chosen, and grand jurors are just basically citizens that have been called to jury duty, and they've been put on a grand jury. And the special prosecutor of a grand jury is solely responsible for the evidence that is shown the grand jurors. And a judge in New York once quipped that a special prosecutor of a grand jury could get grand jurors to indict a ham sandwich. And because it's up to the special prosecutor what he wants to do with those grand jurors. I mean, he can sway them any way he wants because he's the one that chooses all the evidence that's shown to them. He's the one that calls all the witnesses that they hear from. So the grand jury system is can be a notoriously corrupt system in the United States of America. And ultimately, in this situation, I find this grand jury calling the child abuse allegations a carefully crafted hoax, similar to a grand jury indicting a ham sandwich.
Our guest is Nick Bryant on A View from the Bunker. His book is The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal. about the pedophile ring that centered on the Franklin Community Credit Union in Omaha, Nebraska back in the 1980s. Paul Bonacci made some pretty startling claims. What was his story and what happened to Paul Bonacci?
He was a kid that really didn't have, his parents weren't really intact, and his mother had married, I believe, 3 times, and he kind of ended up in this pedophile network. I think he was about 12 years old or so, or that's what he says. And he was subjected to a tremendous amount of abuse, and he suffered greatly. I mean, was diagnosed with multiple personality disorder, and he did make some very startling claims. And I talk about them. Some of them have been completely taken out of context and spun into a high degree of fabrication on the internet. And I take a close look at Paul in my book, and I spent numerous hours with Paul, and I go over a number of his allegations, and I show how a lot of people on the internet have taken his allegations a bridge too far, and but then the other kids that were part of that network remember him. At least 3 of them say that he was there. So,
what ultimately happened to Paul Bonacci?
Well, this is interesting. Both Alicia and Paul were indicted by the state grand jury. Alicia was indicted on 8 counts of perjury, and Paul was indicted on 3. Alicia's trial was probably the longest criminal trial in the history of Nebraska, the perjury trial. I mean, a kid, she was indicted on 8 counts of perjury when she was 20 years old. She spent 2 years in solitary confinement, and her perjury trial was the longest trial, the longest criminal trial in Nebraska history, I believe. I couldn't find a longer one. There perhaps could have been, but I just couldn't find one. And it was imperative that this trial, this state trial, get Alicia on the perjury counts, because that way the grand jury report of a carefully crafted hoax would be sanctified. If Alicia wasn't found guilty, then the whole machinations of that grand jury would have been brought into doubt. So the state pulled out all the stops to make sure that Alicia was found guilty of perjury. In my book, I show several instances of witnesses for the state lying. I show heavy-duty jury manipulation. I show an unbelievably inept and or corrupt judge in her case. There's just so many examples of miscarriage of justices in Alicia's trial. It's actually kind of mind-boggling. But Alicia's, the state thought that they would have a slam dunk against Alicia. They had FBI agents testify against her. They had Nebraska State Patrol investigators testify against her. I mean, they pull out all the stops, didn't they, Alicia? But her jury was in deliberation for 3 days, and there was heavy-duty jury manipulation. I mean, they just barely got her by the skin of their teeth. And then they dropped all the perjury charges against Paul Bonacci. Because if they got Alicia and they didn't get Paul, then not only would the grand jury the grand jury's conclusions be brought into question, but Alicia's conviction be brought into question because their perjury indictments were very, very similar.
Nick Bryant is our guest on A View from the Bunker. The book is The Franklin Scandal. If you've got a question for Nick about what happened in Omaha back in the 80s, the connection to Washington, D.C., the phone number to call is 646-652-4429. That's 646-652-4429. Or if you've got Skype, you can use Skype to click in. Just click the Click to Talk button at blogtalkradio.com/PID radio. townhouse that Lawrence King rented in Washington, D.C. for the parties that he held for the wealthy and powerful. You say this was the connection to Craig Spence?
Well, see, Craig Spence had his own house in Washington, D.C.
He had his own house in Washington. What was the connection between Larry King and Craig Spence? And then who exactly was Craig Spence?
Craig Spence was kind of a mystery man. He's kind of like King. He kind of came out of the same lower socioeconomic background, and he ended up at the pinnacle of Washington society. He was a truly, like King, he was a Republican power broker, a GOP big shot. And he had a house in Washington, D.C., and I have sources, including Spence himself, saying that he was a CIA asset. And I also have a source that provided prostitutes to Spence. Spence not only provided you with children, but provided politicians with children, but if you wanted a young woman in her 20s or a young man in his 20s, he'd provide that too, and he spent $20,000 a month at an escort service that was run by Henry Vinson. And Vincent is I'm the only person that Vincent has ever talked to about that whole ordeal that he went through. And he got very close to Craig Spence, and Craig Spence let him in. Both King and Spence, according to Vincent, let him in on a lot of their secrets. And according to Vincent, Spence had told him that the bugging equipment in his house was provided by the CIA, or put in by the CIA. And he also told that the journalist for the Washington Times that I believe, quote-unquote, friendly intelligence agents had provided him with the bugging equipment and installed the bugging equipment that was in his house.
And that was for the purpose of what?
Blackmail.
And who were the targets of blackmail?
Spence's parties were a who's who of Washington society, American politics, the media personalities. I mean, anybody that went to a party at Spence's house was a target of the blackmail. But here's how it went down. There would be the party after the party. Generally, Spence's parties would start out as like straight political parties or functions, and where there would be a number of power brokers and politicians. It would just start out like an average Washington, D.C. cocktail party where you'd have the rich and the powerful mingling. And at about 10:30 or maybe 11 o'clock or 11:30, somebody would fire up a joint or break out a line of coke, or something sexually inappropriate would go down. And you've got to keep in mind that people would be extremely lubricated on alcohol at this point. Mm-hmm. But people who wanted to stick around would be provided with whatever drug or sexual toy that they wanted, and then they would subsequently be compromised and blackmailed.
And blackmailed by being videotaped or photographed with some of these children that were being brought out from Omaha.
Yes, his house was wired for audiovisual blackmail. Mm.
Now, there was a story that ran in the Washington Times that was rather startling that involved Craig Spence and a visit to the White House. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, actually, Craig Spence took people on 4 midnight tours of the White House that I know of, and at least one of them included prostitutes. I think even an underage prostitute too. Spence, as I said, took. There's 4 midnight tours that I know about, but there are probably more. And this was during the George Herbert Walker Bush administration.
Okay, the George Sr. How did Craig Spence get access to the White House, and what areas of the White House did they visit?
They pretty much had free reign in the White House. I mean, I don't think they woke the Bushes up, but they were pretty much given free reign. And there's Spence's account of how he got in, and then there's the government's account of how he was able to give White House tours. And in Franklin, the government provides invariably provides very implausible explanations for the various things that went down. And according to the government, a Secret Service agent was the one that let Spence in on multiple tours, midnight tours of the White House. Now, I find that kind of difficult to believe that one Secret Service agent would be inviting Craig Spence and hookers into the White House, and other Secret Service agents wouldn't be in the know about that. Mm-hmm. I find that highly implausible.
So, how well connected was Craig Spence then?
Craig Spence was about as well connected as I think you can be. I mean, I talk about
there's to the White House at midnight. Yeah.
I mean, I talk about a New York Times article where he is. It's like he's got a direct line to Mount Olympus. I mean, he can talk to the gods. I mean, it's the amount of power that Craig Spence harnessed was truly astounding.
What was the end of the Craig Spence story? Is there an end to the Craig Spence story? What's he doing now?
Well, Craig Spence is one of the many people in Franklin that committed suicide. And there was a grand jury in Washington, D.C. that was looking into these allegations of blackmail. And it found that there wasn't any blackmail, and it indicted Henry Vincent, who and three of his friends who ran the escort service on multiple counts of pandering. And Henry Vincent had a heck of a story to tell. I mean, he'd been with King and Spence. He'd talked to a lot of very powerful, compromised people. He'd actually seen the blackmail equipment. But the government came after him so vehemently. He was looking at 300 years in prison. I mean, he was just basically running an escort service, but they trumped up the charges, like with Alicia Owen on 8 counts of perjury, where she was looking at 160 years. Well, with Vincent, they basically did the same thing, because Vincent was very cocky initially after he got indicted. He said, "Well, I've got some very interesting stories to tell," but when he realized that he was looking at 300 years, and then the assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia put a petition in with the judge saying that Vincent should be sentenced to more than 300 years because he hadn't screened his escorts for HIV. So the government basically made a deal with him. The government said, if you plead guilty to this count and this count and this count, we'll drop these other counts, and then you'll only go to jail for 6 years. But you got to keep your mouth shut. If you talk, we will put you away forever, and we will throw away the key. So Vincent kept his mouth shut and did his 6 years.
How much have the participants, the actors, the characters in this sordid drama revealed? Guys like Vincent Spence before he committed suicide, Larry King. How much have they actually said?
Well, King has completely kept his mouth shut, but Vincent, like I said, he talked to me. Alicia Owen talked to me, and Henry Vincent talked to me. I'm the only journalist that they've ever talked to, as there are a number of people that talk to me that have never talked before. Mm-hmm. It just took me a number of years to cultivate a lot of trust with a lot of people involved in Franklin.
Well, that's an interesting aspect of the story, and that's something that pops up very early in your book, The Franklin Scandal. The difficulty in getting people like Paul Bonazzi, Alicia Owen, some of the ladies you talk to open up. How painful are these memories to them?
Well, basically, you've got to go into someone's life and tell me and basically say, tell me your worst nightmares. I mean, it's arduous work, and who wants to tell a stranger their worst nightmares? I mean, they don't have any illusions about justice. I mean, they've seen the justice system completely disfigured concerning Franklin. So it was very difficult to get a lot of people to open up. it was very difficult to find a lot of these victims. Gary Caradori, who also died very mysteriously in a plane crash, left a leads list behind that had approximately 60 victims, and that's what I worked on. That's where I got the leads for the victims that I found. And, I'd pop into people's lives and, basically ask them to tell me their worst nightmares. And sometimes I could get them to talk relatively quickly, and other times it would take, I would have to cultivate the relationship for a number of years.
How, and you mentioned the disillusionment of the victims after watching what happened in the so-called investigation of the Franklin cover-up. How did this affect you? I mean, as you dug deeper and deeper into this story and saw time and again how investigators were frustrated, Caradori, who you mentioned, his plane exploded over Lee County, Illinois, as he was returning to Nebraska with what do you call it, the smoking gun?
Yes, I believe that I've got 5 sources that say that he came by pictures of these pedophilic orgies when he was in Chicago.
Okay. And as he was returning to Nebraska with these pictures that would have provided proof positive that the allegations of the victims were true, his plane exploded, killing him and his son, who was, 8 years old at the time?
Yes. He was,
yeah. So the fact that there was a child on board the plane apparently didn't stop whoever wanted to silence Caradori. How did this affect you, Nick, in years of research and dealing with these people and hearing these stories and looking at the documentation and seeing that nothing came of this? How did this change your view of America's justice system?
Well, it was certainly the most arduous thing I've ever done in my life. But on my first trip to Nebraska, I made 14 trips to Nebraska. I had a death threat. I was followed. I was harassed. And then I got a hold of some of the documentation and talked to some people that had been involved. And the death threat really sanctified it, that it was real. And I thought to myself, should I or shouldn't I go for it? And I, as you commented at the beginning of the show, I've written a lot in children's issues, and I just decided that it was too evil, that I had to go for it. I kind of felt that I'd have a very hard time living with myself if I was in a possible position to have done something about this, because there are other Franklins that have gone down. And as we're talking, there are probably Franklins that are active right now in the United States of America. And the thing about it is, Franklin is a disease. When you've got the government covering up the abuse of scores of children, I mean, that's a disease in the society. And the only way that you can go about getting rid of a disease is by diagnosing it. I mean, that's the first step. And then you can follow up with treatment. And I think with the Franklin scandal, I diagnosed a disease in our society. And that's why I worked so hard on it, as I wanted to corroborate it so heavily, make it so airtight that people couldn't possibly say that this did not occur, that this is not a reality. But yes, it was very arduous. It took a toll on me.
The book is The Franklin Scandal. We're talking with the author Nick Bryant on A View from the Bunker, and I will point out that the book, which is roughly 620 pages of text, 630 pages, the last 120 pages or so are simply copies of documents filed by investigators in the case, affidavits, articles, court documents, photos, newspaper clippings, and so forth that establish the accusations of the victims. So, as Nick says, this is not speculation, and that's why I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about this, Nick, because stories like this do acquire a life of their own on the Internet, and it doesn't do us any good if we're boxing at shadows. We need to know the actual extent of the disease that we're dealing with. One of the first victims you talked to, or one of the first victims featured in the book, The Franklin Scandal, Shawnita Moore, you mentioned that she had talked about being forced to witness murders, young children being murdered. There was a ritualistic aspect to that case, as there was in the case of the Finders, the headquarters in Washington, D.C., the case that was shut down by the CIA. How often did descriptions of ritualistic abuse and murder show up in your investigation?
It showed up, but it was rare. I mean, there's a lot of internet sensationalism that just talks about that element of the story, but
Sure.
that element of the story is actually relatively small. The big thing about the Franklin scandal is an interstate pedophile network that was covered up by the federal government. I mean, the almost pinnacle of federal government. I mean, that is the big thing with the Franklin scandal. There were accounts of ritual abuse, but they were few and far between.
Okay.
But as I said earlier, a lot of the kids that I talked to were subjected to very sadistic treatment. Just about all of them.
There was a documentary that was prepared by Yorkshire Television out of the UK. And this is another story that's kind of circulated around the internet. The documentary is real, but the story is that the government shut it down. What's the truth behind the documentary Conspiracy of Silence?
If you go to my website, www.franklinscandal.com, I've got the most pristine copy of Conspiracy of Silence on the internet, and actually I've got scenes that have never been seen before. But according to the director and producer who I talked to, they said that the Discovery Channel pulled the plug on it. In the Apocrypha that's circulated around the internet, it talks about powerful entities within the government of the United States forcing the documentary off the air. I don't know if more powerful players got involved with the Discovery Channel or not, but I do know that it was ultimately an executive at the Discovery Channel that pulled the plug on the documentary being shown.
Mm-hmm. So all we can establish is that there was a documentary produced, but it just never saw air. But you can see it at www.franklinscandal.com. Now, at the website, Nick, there's a link to a trailer from an upcoming documentary. What's the status of that?
Well, I'm working on a documentary, and it seems to be like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Hopefully, it'll be coming out at a theater near you at some time in the foreseeable future.
The implications of this, you mentioned that there may be other Franklins taking place right now that we don't know about. Did you stumble onto any indication, any evidence that indicated that that was so?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I believe that there was a very recent Franklin that was exquisitely covered up by the federal government that was flying kids around. Same MO. It was primarily young girls instead of young boys, but very similar MO. And I've come across the phenomena in other states too. So I think that these organized pedophile networks are with us still to this day. And I've talked to a number of anti-trafficking organizations, and they throw around numbers that between 100 and 300,000 American children are trafficked domestically every year, but nobody ever gets busted for it. There's never been an interstate pedophile network that's ever been busted in the United States of America. Generally, you've got a couple of marginal guys transporting a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old interstate, but there's never been an interstate pedophile network that's been busted. So if you're talking between 1 and 300,000 children, American children being trafficked in America, you're obviously talking about some very refined networks that are in operation. And none of them have ever been busted.
There's a comment in the chat room at blogtalkradio.com/PID radio. Reminds me of an account that I read about in Dave McGowan's book, Program to Kill, out of Belgium. Are you familiar?
The Dutroux scandal and Franklin are very similar, yes.
Yeah, Dutroux. Dutroux, right.
there's a lot of similarities between Dutroux and Franklin.
So this is not just a problem here in the United States. This is something that is global?
Yes. Since I've been working on Franklin, there's been power broker pedophile networks covered up in Belgium, Portugal, and Chile, I believe. Or no, Venezuela, and also Mexico.
And if the evidence from the Finders case is any indication, there are links between these groups, it would seem, of children being sent around the world at, products, purchase orders sent back and forth. It's really distressing. Once you get into this kind of research, Nick, how do you ever back away from it?
Well, I haven't. I'm still pretty much immersed in it, trying to get this documentary out. And it's something that I've developed a lot of expertise in. I think I know trafficking very, very well. I mean, a lot of people aren't really cognizant of these refined, protected trafficking networks that are at work in the United States. And until Americans are cognizant of this, they're going to continue destroying children. So it's something that I haven't backed away from. It's something that I continue to go forward on.
And at your site, franklinscandal.com, there's a note and a link that says this will be the first book to tell a complete tale of a power elite pedophile ring. Do you have, besides the documentary, do you have more books in the works?
At this point, I just kind of want to finish this documentary, and then, I could certainly write another book about the same subject matter without a problem.
Well, without a problem, maybe putting it lightly, because I don't know. Again, I'm only about 25. Well,
I should say that I don't have a dearth of material.
yeah. In that respect, and sadly, so. The book is The Franklin Scandal, published rather courageously, I'd say, by Trine Day Publishing. Chris Milligan, the publisher, donating 50% of the book's proceeds to organizations that assist abused children. Nick Bryant is the author. His website, franklinscandal.com, and there you'll find information about the forthcoming documentary. Also, the cleanest copy you'll find on the Internet of the documentary that never made it to the Discovery Channel, Conspiracy of Silence. Nick, I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule tonight, and especially I appreciate the research and the depth that you put into the book, The Franklin Scandal. I'd like to say that I enjoy reading it. That wouldn't be the whole truth, but it is a valuable addition to our library. And again, I appreciate the risks and the work you took in putting it together.
It's been great talking to you, Derek. Thanks for having me on the show.
All right.
Nick Bryant, author of The Franklin Scandal, from the archives here at A View from the Bunker back in November of 2010. A frequent guest in the early years of A View from the Bunker was William H. Kennedy. Sadly, he passed away and is gone home to be with the Lord. But we still have those programs in the archives, and we'll bring you one of those regarding his work, his research into the pedophile priest scandals inside the Roman Catholic Church. Lucifer's Lodge, William H. Kennedy, straight ahead on A View from the Bunker.
The victims of the human trafficking and sex trade industry have reached a boiling point around the world. But here in the United States, the demand has never been higher. Tragically, the massive growth of these unconscionable underground organizations is due in part to many citizens' disbelief that our modern society is capable of such atrocities, and live in a denial that these crimes are taking place here on our soil each and every day. SkyWatchTV and Whispering Ponies Ranch remain committed to providing ministry to the hurting, to the victims of abuses just like this and so much more. This is why we're proud to announce our new partnership with Yaku Buyans and 8 Days Ministry. In an effort to educate on these important topics and provide you with the tools needed to get engaged in the fight against sex trafficking, we present the 8 Days Special Collection, In this timely collection, you'll receive the cinematic movie inspired by actual events from director Yaku Buyan's 8 Days. This shocking presentation masterfully illustrates sequence by sequence how the victims of sex trafficking are often lured into entrapment, portrayed through the eyes of the lead characters. This incredible collection also includes the phenomenal book and companion workbook on disc, Woman of Influence, written by 8 Days screenwriter Philippa Buyans and lead actress Katie Walker. This 30-day devotional and companion workbook on disc is an inspiring, deeply affirming, and educational set that will encourage women to walk in the true identity of influence and purpose bestowed on them as daughters of the Most High God. But that's not all. You'll also receive on DVD the never-before-released, uncensored, off-the-record interview with the team behind the 8 Days movie, featuring Yaku and Philippa Buyans and actress Katie Walker as they disclose the hard-hitting realities of just how far the sex trafficking industry reaches, what the Trump administration has done to rescue thousands of victims, how the children of communities, including yours, may be at risk, and what you can do to fight back. Sold separately, this invaluable collection holds a retail value of $90. Yours now for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling. Sex trafficking is a difficult conversation, but ignoring it doesn't make it go away or help its victims. Understand this epidemic and learn how you can help by ordering the 8 Days Special Collection. Online now at the SkyWatchTV store or call 1-844-750-4985.
Coming to you from the heart of the Missouri Ozarks every Sunday night at 7 p.m. Central Time. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Next week, our program deals with archaeology, something a little happier as far as the topic. The location of the biblical Sodom and the actual date of the Exodus. We dig into the archives next week and speak with Dr. Philip Sylvia and David Roll. Again, next Sunday evening, that's June 9th, 2019, here at vftb.net, A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Again, in the early years of VFTB, we did a number of interviews with our next guest, and sadly, he passed away too young at the age of 49 back in August of 2013. He was found dead in his home. No signs of foul play, but no previous record of bad health either. And, of course, there were questions raised because of the subject matter that he researched and wrote about. Nothing ever suggested anything other than just natural cause. But still, we are sorry that we never had the opportunity to meet him in person, because we definitely benefited from his research and his writing. And on September 27th of 2009, this was episode number 15 of this then new podcast, almost 10 years ago, we spoke for the first time with William H. Kennedy. The enemy strikes at the weakest among us and often uses those most trusted. That's why sexual crimes involving children, especially on the part of those in the clergy, is so shocking. And sadly, there are far too many of those stories in the news. Our guest tonight is the author of Lucifer's Lodge, Satanic Ritual Abuse in the Catholic Church, also Satanic Crime, A Threat in the New Millennium, and a number of e-books available at his website. He's also the host of Sphinx Radio, and has had a number of fascinating guests over the couple of years he's done that program. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit, too. We welcome to the bunker William H. Kennedy. Bill, good to talk with you again.
Very good to be here, Derek. It's very appropriate that this show has the title that it does, because the last time we talked, I've become more and more of a survivalist more than anything else, with the way the people at the top of our economic and political pyramid treat the rest of us. These very few people. I've gone into survival mode, so I'm happy to be in a bunker.
Well, we say that tongue-in-cheek. We kind of joke about it because we know that ultimately he that is in us is greater than he that is in the world. So we certainly don't want to give anyone the impression that we're stockpiling anything more substantial than, say, beans and rice and toilet paper, because we're convinced when the economy really crashes, it's going to be toilet paper becomes the medium of exchange. Forget about gold. You stockpile stuff you can use. So, well, anyway, Bill, there have been a number of cases, very disturbing, high-profile cases that have been in the news lately, And ever since we first had the opportunity to read Lucifer's Lodge and your research into satanic ritual abuse, both within and outside the Roman Catholic Church, of course, you're the fellow that we think about in terms of getting your opinion, your take on what's happening out there. And these cases over the last couple of months include the Philip Garrido case, the man who abducted 11-year-old J.C. Dugard 19 years ago, or 18 years ago, and held her essentially as a sex slave for all this time. Another recent case from that same area, east of San Francisco, Tracy, California, this time, Melissa Huckabee, a woman who's portrayed by the media as a Sunday school teacher, although interestingly enough, it's Sunday school at a church with no members, is accused of the murder of 8-year-old Sandra Cantu. There was another case from Tracy, California, earlier this year, back in January, of a 15-year-old boy who showed up at a health club wearing nothing but boxer shorts and a chain around his ankle, and apparently he'd just broken free from a basement where he'd been held captive in chains for a year. And of course, that's also the same general area where the Scott and Lacey Peterson case took place. Bill, what is going on in the Central Valley of California?
Well, it's very strange. I'm very familiar with that area. I have my master's degree from San Francisco State University in philosophy, and I studied with Jacob Needleman there, the occult historian. So I'm pretty up on what's going on. And what I discovered about that area of the country is that there is definitely a huge network of Satanists and people who are into creepy sexual type activities. Now, when I was out there, this was 89 to 92, you used to read a lot of things in the news. This was before the internet. They had things in newspapers and personal ads about people looking for sex slaves. Very strange stuff. I took note of that then. But what's happening there seems highly bizarre, especially that case of the boy who showed up in the underwear and a chain to escape his slave master. This is actually a very widespread thing. And the other big case that got much more national publicity was actually in New York, and it was a fellow named John Jamelski. Sorry for my poor pronunciation there. But this fellow was keeping sex slaves. He built a chamber under his house, like a bunker, and he would abduct women and keep them there as sex slaves. And he had a weird religious thing. He had a giant crucifix down there, and he used to make these women pray, kneel naked and pray and tell all their sins. And he would mistreat them. He would not feed them well and beat them and repeatedly rape them. And what happened was this... Jamelski didn't kill any of them. When he got tired of them, he would simply let them go. And one of his victims went straight to the police. She was held as a sex slave for 2 years. 2 years. And she went back to her mother, told her what happened. They went to the police, and the police did nothing.
Really?
Okay, the police did absolutely nothing to go look out what she said. What happened is later on he was caught on a different case, and the police did nothing to investigate this. They thought that woman was just some nut. So when you hear about the kid in the Central Valley, coming in that doesn't really surprise me. Now, another thing that was around that area, and I'm talking there again, 89 to 92 when I was there. A friend of mine showed me a bizarre sex slave contract that they were selling in porno magazines. So this was very, very strange. Me and this other fellow who were at San Francisco State, Jacob Needleman, used to give us assignments to find the bizarrest materials we could find in the Bay Area. Strangest groups, and there's a lot of strange ones out there for a lot of different reasons. Not all of them do illegal things, but on the strange meter, on a scale of 1 to 10, these people are like a 14. But one of the things was this underground fetish sex slave, kind of with Satanist overtones to it, And this very bizarre contract, it had two names, and the slave master would give the victim, I guess, a sex slave name. They would change their name, and they would only address each other. And this bizarre contract that was from this porno magazine now, printed up, and I don't know how large a distribution it got, but it looked like a fairly, widespread porno book. But it had very strange things like the master may inflict pain on the slave at any time for any reason. The slave must do absolutely everything that the master says without question. Really bizarre, kind of sick stuff. And these were, as I say, sold. So this points to not only a secret network, but certainly a secret network that is fueled by mainstream pornography sources. They wouldn't be selling stuff like that if there weren't a market for it. You know what I'm saying? It's supply and demand.
Sure.
They wouldn't come up with something like that just for fun,
Well, Bill, we know from reading about Aleister Crowley, and you provided a number of works at your website and in your books, especially Satanic Crime, A Threat in the New Millennium, about Crowley and his background, his practices. And we know that deviant, and I know that's a relative term, it's in the eye of the beholder, but I think for most of us we can accept on a pretty common agreement as to what deviant entails. Deviant sexual behavior was a big part of the rituals that Aleister Crowley developed for his Gnostic Mass and his his OTO organization. What is it about these deviant types of sex behaviors that attracts people? Is it just a kinky physical thrill, or is there something more to it than that?
Well, it's very multi-leveled, and, we all like the simplest explanations for the material we cover or the stories we hear. Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is the best. Mm-hmm. However, when you're in the realm of Satanism and the psychology of Satanists, it's a very multifaceted, multi-level thing. These people are usually people who, didn't get along in high school. They didn't get high grades. They weren't on any sports teams. They weren't popular with the opposite sex. They went to this in rebellion against a society they feel has rejected them. And what you got to keep in mind is, when you get into bizarre sex stuff, I mean, let's face it, Freud was right to a great extent. Sexuality is a huge and powerful influence.
Absolutely.
And even from a Christian perspective, sex is still it's a sacred thing. It even takes on more meaning when you add the Christian element to sexuality. It's a hugely powerful influence. So the fact that a lot of these Satanists are involved with deviant sexual practices comes as no surprise, in the sense that they become kind of self-worshippers to a great extent, and sexuality plays into that, ego-boosting, things of that nature. And it's quite a strange thing, because, as I say, it's multi-level. These people have been bullied. They feel dejected. They're really not, never got along with the opposite sex, might have tension with their parents. So these are people who've essentially given up on mainstream society and mainstream religion. That's the first thing you must understand. The second thing, once you abandon that, you certainly rebel against it. And the third thing is, to rebel against it, you must get deeper and deeper into more deviant activity, much like a heroin addict needs a stronger dose. As his habit builds up, that first dose that the heroin addict shot up, he'll need 4 or 5 times that, in 3 or 4 months, very quick. And with Satanism, it's the same thing. Now, I'm not saying all Satanists get into illegal activity, but they certainly get into very strange sex. They tend to move, if they do escalate towards something bigger, it's usually things like they start killing animals first, And in some cases, and I want to make this clear, this is very rare, what I'm about to say, extremely rare for a Satanist to capture someone or murder someone or kill someone. It's an extremely rare occurrence.
Right.
And the chance of a stranger, a Satanist boogeyman, like grabbing your kids and running off with them and performing a strange ritual and maybe murdering with them, the odds of that happening are very astronomical. What people out there should do with their children is most rapes are acquaintance rapes, I'm afraid.
Mm-hmm.
They're people the person has known for a long time. So worry about your friends and your family around your children.
Right.
Because the boogeyman around the corner probably won't get him. Most of the time it's one of those people.
Well, and I'm not certainly trying to stir up any echoes of the satanic panic of the 80s and early 90s. Although, let me be clear, I do believe that, and I think you would agree, Bill, that satanic ritual abuse is real. It is not a figment of the imagination of paranoid fundamentalist Christians. But my point, I guess, in looking at the Philip Garrido case and the case of Melissa Huckabee, where in both cases young girls were abducted and sexually abused. At least that's the charge in the Huckabee case and in the Garrido case. And we also saw that in the case of the Toledo case. Father Robinson, was it?
Yeah, Father Gerald Robinson.
Gerald Robinson, where the
murdered the nun. Yeah.
Murdered the nun, but that murder came to light because women who had been sexually abused as girls came forward to complain and try to press charges against Father Gerald Robinson and his colleagues for abusing them as children. So while it may be rare, I guess
it does happen, and that's where I come in.
Right? Yeah. And my question is, why these sexual acts against children? Why not with consenting adults?
Well, there again, it ties into the psychology I mentioned earlier. Much like a heroin addict needs a stronger dose of heroin or OxyContin or whatever opiate he or she can get his hands on, and their tolerance builds up. It's the same thing with these Satanists, these ones who become deviant. Generally speaking, they start off with animals, then that's not enough. They don't get the same thrill out of it, and they move on to people. And, they sexually abuse other consenting adults. But the next level of evil, and this is where they get their thrill, it's kind of a diabolical mysticism or an evil high. It's the opposite of like Christian mysticism where you let the Holy Spirit permeate you, body, soul, and mind. These people, they go to the other end. They let the devil permeate them. And the devil, remember, the devil can reward us in this world. He can make sex better. He can give us money and wealth. And but the price is you have to get more and more deviant. And the most deviant thing you can do, would be to rape a child. It's worse than murder. You murder someone, their suffering is over. You rape a child, their suffering is just begun. They're going to have to go the rest of their lives are ruined then. And in many ways, it's a fate worse than death. And these people who step into the realm of child molestation, whether they are linked to Satanist groups or not, and not all of them are, I never claimed that.
Right.
But once you get in that realm, you stepped into the specter of pure evil. It's pure evil at that point.
Well, and that's one of the things that Crowley believed, that the bigger the taboo, the bigger the sexual taboo that you could break, the greater the magical power you would bring unto yourself through that act.
It's like the law of attraction, The Secret, but you throw very strange sex in. Now, what Crowley used to do on his island in Sicily, he had a satanic commune there, is he would have sex between goats and human beings, and he would allow the children of the community to watch. Okay? He would let children watch bestiality. It's unclear if they were sexually abused, and I wouldn't say that about anyone, even Aleister Crowley, if I didn't have absolute proof. However, it is clear that he allowed children to watch bestiality and rituals, and it's also clear that he called for the human sacrifice of a baby male child in his book Magic and Theory and Practice. That, this can be easily verified. So he certainly wasn't. That is child abuse, what he did, allowing children to watch goats and adults engage in sex. That is certainly certainly child abuse, but it's not molestation. So there again, when you get into the rape of children, the thrill factor, these people, there's a common trend. They start with pornography, then they go to, like, prostitutes, if they can, and then, they need a bigger dose, a stronger dose, so they start sexually abusing children, which is the ultimate breaking of a taboo. As you said, there's no society, tribal or industrial, that tolerates this on any level once it becomes public knowledge, and it's a universal pure evil.
Now, I don't have any statistics to back this up, but it just seems like the news lately has brought us more high-profile cases from California in recent years than just about anywhere. And there have been some other cases, to be sure, like the Hosanna Church case down in Louisiana, where the police said, well, this was satanic, and we've got the robes and the symbols on the walls and on the floors, and, oh, wait a second, no, it's not satanic, never mind, nothing to see here. But again, the Garrido case, the Huckabee case, and others through the years, the McMartin preschool case, which wasn't in that same area of California, but that was one of the first high-profile cases of child abuse. Again, most of it was dismissed from the courts in spite of evidence that something took place there. Is there something about California that attracts this kind of that attracts this kind of behavior, or am I just imagining things here? Am I a prejudiced Midwesterner?
No, not at all, Derek. Because the San Francisco Bay Area has been a hotbed for this stuff since the cowboy days. Okay, and when you go back in 1872, and Wyatt Earp was still out there gunslinging in those days. A group was formed there called the Bohemian Grove.
Okay.
Now, just to give you a quick breakdown, the Bohemian Grove was started by rich railroaders and bankers who were living in San Francisco who wanted a kind of cultural center where they could mingle with each other, and it quickly evolved into a secret society. And they perform this bizarre ritual every year. They're headquartered in California, but they have the Bohemian Club is in California. I had lunch there once. It was very nice. A friend lived there, and I didn't know what it was at the time. But it was
so for listeners who aren't aware, the Bohemian Grove is not the wooded retreat itself, or not. That's not the location. The Bohemian Grove is the club, and their headquarters are in San Francisco.
Club in San Francisco, and they own a grove called the Bohemian Grove in Northern California that they go every summer for 2 weeks. The world's richest and most powerful men are asked to join, and I'm talking people like Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon. Is a Bohemian Grove member.
Well, although Nixon later called it the most faggy, blankety-blank thing he'd ever seen.
Now, Nixon, when you listen to the tapes that they got from the White House, he has very mixed feelings about it, because there's that talk he gave there, that little stab against it, saying that it was a homosexual organization with a different set of values.
Right.
Okay, and this is kind
that's
of
not
what
to defend. That's not to defend Nixon. It's just to point out.
No. But in another talk he gave, he said that he knew that he would win the presidency after he gave a talk at the Bohemian Grove. At the Bohemian Grove, Richard Nixon concluded that he could be president of the United States. So he has mixed feelings. He knew it was powerful and important enough that he had to, join it, though he didn't think much of these particular, I don't know what he thought of the rituals. I guess he thought they were faggy. But,
but the point is, he still went and shook hands and pressed the flesh so that he could become the president of the United States.
That he would be president by doing so. Now, this homosexual thing you're talking about, another guy I met during my sojourn in California, a fellow named Hunter S. Thompson, who is a famous writer. Mm-hmm. I read his books. I met him a couple times. I liked him personally very much. He died of an alleged suicide after in his last book, he came out with a thing which basically accused the Bohemian Grove of molesting children in the same area you're talking about in California. And it's very strange. Hunter was on the phone with his ex-wife discussing I believe his speaking tour, and he said, hold on a minute, and then he allegedly shot himself in the head. But it is deeply, deeply suspected that he was murdered, and it was made to look like a suicide because he bought out this Bohemian Club, Bohemian Grove molestation thing. Now, it's very, very strange because it's an occult organization. They worship an owl. Alex Jones snuck in there and filmed their weird owl ceremony where they do a mock human sacrifice to this giant owl god, and they all Ku Klux Klan type outfits.
Right. Cremation of care, and they call the owl Molech. Yeah, it's
very strange stuff goes on there. And but back to Hunter S. Thompson, he claimed that they were running a pedophile ring out of there. And a late friend of mine and ours, really, Michael Corbin, God rest his soul, was also looking into this in the very area you're talking about where all these strange things are coming up. I mean, the image of that little girl on the security camera skipping away out of the camera view and, knowing that what horrible things happen to her, it's very blood-curdling and chilling. Mm-hmm. Now, the Bohemian Grove in that area, I'm not saying these people are all connected, but as I said earlier, there's this cultural milieu out there where you can get these sex slave contracts, written in very nice calligraphy, I remember. Very strange stuff. So this is what they're selling in stores. So,
and there've been a couple of websites where guys have gone down with cameras to the annual Gay Pride Parade in San Francisco and taken pictures of what's going on the streets of San Francisco, with the protection of the police to keep the peace and to keep protesters away from bothering the folks in the parade. And frankly, it's not safe for work, to borrow a phrase from the vernacular. You can't look at the pictures in a public place that are of things that were taking place on the streets of San Francisco.
I mean, a blatant sexuality, S&M activities, sodomy. You name it. I mean, this is the public stuff. So God knows what goes on in private. But there's a connectedness to all of these things, in that these people live in these clandestine realms, and with the internet, it becomes very strange because they can unite like you can't believe. Mm-hmm. And there was a series that they did on television called To Catch a Predator.
Right.
Where they did these stings. Chris Hansen got this group called Perverted Justice, which goes after online predators. And I mean, they caught people meeting children at sex. They caught a Baptist minister. Mm-hmm. Caught a rabbi, David Kay. They actually caught a whole bunch. David Kay, one of the rabbis they caught in this thing, Chris Hansen, they discovered he had a whole network of rabbi pedophiles.
Oh, boy.
Working with raping children. So just under the surface, it's a matter of, as you said earlier, it's an infiltration of, things like the rabbinical class and the Catholic priest class, and just right down the line. Now, I want to also point out, and I can't give you statistics for this, that a lot of these children that go missing actually go unreported, especially when they're taken from extremely poor cities.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are reports, same area we're talking about. I get a lot of reports from the tent city in the Sacramento area.
Okay.
From a lot of these people have lost their homes and they've set up a little tent city.
Mm-hmm.
They listen to me on various radios and in the library on the internet, and they text message me to my email account, and they also send me emails from local libraries. They use the equipment. I'm told that there have been children gone missing there, and they've reported it to the police, and the police won't even take a report because these people, you know, they have no legal address, they have no this, they have no that. The police don't believe them. They think they're just looking for attention. So even, you know, that's one situation. And, you know, I confirm these people who contacted me were there. You know, I have contacts in Sacramento, and they're telling the truth. And I believe they're telling the truth about these children going missing. And, you know, God knows who grabbed them. It could be one of these secret society groups. It could be a lone nut like Jamelski. It could, you know, it could be a variety of things. But when a child goes missing, a pre-adolescent child, he's usually abducted by someone who's abusing him. And a lot of the times it's in these random kidnappings. Again, they're very rare, but they do happen. And the big question is, how do we gather statistics on, like, these tent city type situations?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I pray to God that this is an isolated incident, what these people are telling me about from the tent cities of children being abducted and disappearing in the police. I hope, they've told me of 3 cases, and, I hope and pray that those are the only 3. But from my experience, I think it's much deeper than that. And, again, it's my opinion, and it's a speculation, a conjecture. I have nothing to back this up. But I have confirmed that these children have gone missing, and I fear there are more.
Well, we're talking with William H. Kennedy, author of Lucifer's Lodge, Satanic Ritual Abuse in the Catholic Church, and Satanic Crime, A Threat in the New Millennium. Also the host of Sphinx Radio on the internet at sphinxradio.com. Bill, you're branching out into other areas of media as well. You're getting involved in producing documentaries, I understand. What are you working on?
Well, I'm not producing documentaries. Here's what I am doing. I just finished part of a series for True TV, for a series that's called Children That Kill. And I filmed this with a filmmaker from Quebec named Christian Page. He runs a production company called Blue Planet Productions, which is, they work out of Quebec. Mm-hmm. And they make different series. Like, they made a series on the paranormal for the Space Channel in Canada called Missing Link, which dealt with things like Bigfoot and UFOs and ghosts and things of that nature. That's one of the series they did. And they did another series called Children That Kill. And there'll be I just finished filming it, and this is the breakdown. This is how it's going to appear. It's going to come on in 2010, I think in March and April. It's going to be on Television Quebec in a French version. Simultaneously, it's going to be on Court TV Canada in an English version. And then after that, by next summer 2010, it will be on True TV primetime down here in the States. It's called Children That Kill. That's the tentative name for the documentary series. Now, that might change, and I'll let you know if it does. But I was in the episode on Ricky Casso. And Ricky Casso was a fellow who killed his friend in 1984 in a satanic ritual in Northport, Long Island in New York. It's the famous Say You Love Satan case, which I cover in Satanic Crime. Now, the filming of that went so well that Christian Page, who is the big cheese on these products, I'm not the director or producer, he is. I want to make that. He's my boss. I'm not taking any credit from him. But he's actually a very nice man, and so is his staff, especially Denise Bonds, his assistant and his cameraman. When they came down here to film, they were wonderful to work with. We did it very quick. But that went so well that we've gotten the funding to do a 13-part series on occult crime. And I will be in every episode as a talking head expert. Now, when I have my more egotistical moments, seeing that I'm in all 13 episodes, I like to say it's my series, but that's mon série in French, but that's stretching it a bit. It's Christian Page's series, and I'm going to be in it and working on it. He's the director and producer of Blue Planet Productions, and this 13-part series, I can't say which networks it will be on. I will only say that people will discover it very after the negotiations are over.
I hear nothing? Yeah.
Sergeant Schultz.
Right.
Yeah, very good, very good. You're old like me. Half the kids don't even know what that is.
I'm older.
But, this series, what we're going to do is try and cover some of the more obscure cases of occult and satanic crime. And the one thing we want to do is a whole hour documentary on a guy named Richard Chase. Richard Chase is the vampire of Sacramento, our favorite part of the country.
Yeah.
And in the late 70s, he murdered a bunch of people. He thought he was a vampire. And he began to murder people and drink their blood, thinking that if he didn't drink their blood, he would disintegrate.
Okay.
His last victim was a 22-year-old baby, which is, I know, it's just a horrible thought. But that's one of the cases we're going to go over. There's a couple other more obscure cases. Now, the network may have us do some of the more well-known cases like David Berkowitz and Charles Manson, the son of, all that stuff, which has been done to death. But if the network wants it, we'll dedicate some of these 13 episodes to them. But we're going to look more at the obscure cases that I should say they're covered in the mainstream media, but they're usually put on the back burner of coverage. For example, they're never on the homepage of the New York Times,
right,
or the Boston Globe or what have you. They're usually buried somewhere, and it's very strange because these stories, you think they'd make national headlines, but really don't, because the powers that be, for reasons I'm still trying to understand, don't like the mainstream public to ponder too much on the nature of the occult aspects of a lot of the crime that we see around us. I don't fully understand it. I think they're covering it up myself. But
well, a classic example of that again is the Hosanna Church case from Louisiana, where the police told the press that we've got the these markings and these robes that they wore in the rituals, and there's these symbols and sigils that are painted on the floor and on the walls, and oh, wait a minute, no, it's not an occult crime, never mind, forget it, just a case of abuse, that's all.
Yeah, they like to say it's a drug deal gone wrong or a case of abuse or someone who was bullied. And it's very strange. I'll give you another case we're going to do. And this just came up. This is a local case in the Boston area, my neck of the woods here. There's a fellow named James Riva who in 1980 somehow got the notion that he was a 700-year-old vampire. He was a big fan of, as I was, of Dark Shadows.
Oh, yeah.
Vampire soap opera.
I used to have the board game.
Collins. And James Riva was a bigger fan than we were, because he came to the conclusion that he was a 700-year-old vampire. And what he did is he killed his 74-year-old grandmother, who was in a wheelchair, and fed off her blood. And what he did, how he killed her, is very strange. He shot her with a gun, but he painted the bullets gold.
Okay.
He cleared the bullets in them, because if a silver bullet kills a child of Satan, a vampire, then gold, which is the Christian color, the color of Christ, the color of the chalice in the Catholic Church. Of course, in vampire logic, you have to kill your victim with gold bullets.
Okay.
And he killed the woman, his grandmother, and fed off the blood. And then just a few months ago, this was 1980, he tried to get parole, saying he was psychotic at the time. But he attacked a guard thinking he was a vampire while he was in jail, so they didn't let him out. And he was selling art from his prison, and people made him stop because they didn't like him making money off of crime. You know, he stopped because people asked him to stop. But he was denied parole. And there again, most people in the United States have never heard of James River. You know, they've never heard of the case in Sacramento I just gave you. You know, these things happen, they go underreported. And there again, I'm not saying every murderer is a Satanist or an occultist or thinks they're a vampire or this or that. Most criminals steal for money. And that's their big motivation, not Satanism. Money is the root of all evil when it comes to most crime.
Well, the love of money, yeah.
Love of money, the obsession with money to the where you'll kill other people. And the other big thing is that what we talked about earlier. It's usually sex or money that people kill over. Very passionate things.
And authorities will typically say, Bill, that these crimes that have occult overtones. For example, another case from California, Richard Hamlin, from last year, where he was convicted of torturing his wife. If I remember the case correctly, his wife had gone to the police and said that her father was the head of a satanic group that had demanded a sacrifice of her husband. And through a series of bizarre twists and turns, too long to get into here, Richard Hamlin, the husband, wound up on trial and was convicted on charges of torturing his wife, which under California's sentencing law means he could spend the rest of his life in prison. And again, the bizarre thing is that it was his wife who originally went to the police and said, I've been sexually abused for years by my family, my father, and they want to kill my husband. And the husband winds up in prison for the rest of his life. And the occult nature, the occult links to this case were downplayed and rarely reported on. The Hosanna case I've talked about, the Father Gerald Robinson case from Toledo it was big news in Toledo, but it didn't make much national news. And when these cases do come out, it seems to me that whatever occult aspects there are downplayed or denied. Now, Bill, is it really the case that a lot of these occult crimes like Son of Sam or the Manson family or whatever are just sort of playing at being involved with the occult? Or is there a true spiritual presence here, an influence from the dark side at work?
Okay, people can interpret what I report any way they want, but no one can deny the satanic elements. Now, personally, I believe that there's a devil who causes mischief and horror in human affairs. But even if you don't, even if you're out there and you're listening and you're an atheist, I don't delve too much into theology or the nature of religion. What I try to do is report as accurately and precisely as I can on occult and satanic crimes. And no one can deny the satanic elements that are there. How people interpret them are secondary to what my function is. My function is really, I'm not a minister, I'm not a priest, I'm not an evangelist. I'm a writer and speaker on religious topics that focuses on occult crimes that go underreported. So I kind of leave theology to theologians and theological debates to people better trained in this than I. But what I think is important about my work is that I'm extremely accurate as I can be, and no one's 100% perfect. I'm not claiming that. But I try and back up what I say with sound sources. And people can see it at williamhkennedy.com, and they can go to the Ritual Abuse Multimedia page there, and you'll see tons of cases like I'm talking about, including the Father Robinson case, which only True TV, when he was on trial, got into any of the satanic aspects. One network kind of hype up certain things when it's convenient, and I'm doing things for them. I hope they're not mad at me, but that's a true observation. They did do a good job with the Gerald Robinson case, but only when he was on trial, and only for a couple of days, and then they completely dropped it. And there's not much about him on any other network. So there again, when you look at the media as a whole, Gerald Robinson was put on the back burner because only one major cable network covered it that really focuses on true crime fans, True TV.
Right.
And the mainstream American shows like Good Morning America and the Today Show and programs of that nature didn't cover Gerald Robinson at all.
And you'd think that the 24-hour cable news networks, which are always looking for fodder for the shows, Nancy Grace, Jane Velez Mitchell, or whatever her name is, you'd think that one of them would have picked up, because there are sensational aspects to that story. But the only place you can find any consistent coverage of that story, in-depth coverage, was the Toledo Blade newspaper, which still has those archived articles online, I believe.
I actually was an advisor to the Toledo Blade during the coverage of when the Gerald Robinson case initially broke. The Toledo Blade contacted me, and I was an advisor to them as the case unfolded. And what I told them initially, and they didn't quite believe me, I said, it will come out that Robinson was not acting alone, that he was part of a larger satanic group, and he wasn't a lone nut murdering Satanists. He would have had other contact with many other people in this, and I turned out to be right. There was a satanic group there that Robinson was a part of called Sisters of the Assumed Mary, or SAM for short. And what they did is they sexually abused young girls, 5, 6, 7 years old, in a coffin, and consecrated their private parts to Lucifer with a snake, and did a lot of bizarre sexual type things that I really don't want to get into. It's a tasteful thought, to be honest with you. But he was part of a larger thing. And the guy I advised there was a friend of mine named Mike Sala, who was a reporter for the Toledo Blade, who just before that had won the Pulitzer Prize for reporting he did on a Vietnam story. So strangely, when the Robinson case broke, as shocked as I was quite flattered that a Pulitzer Prize winner would contact me as an authority. That, my ego kicked in for a second. I admit it. I'm a human being. But to get back to the bigger thing, these things happen, and children are far more abused than we realize, and they're far more abused in ritualistic settings than we realize. Now, it's impossible to get statistics about how many people are being sexually abused. Now, there's an organization out there called Not for Sale, and what they do is they look at international human sex trafficking, part of which does deal in satanic and ritual abuse, and this is run primarily by the Russian mob internationally with a lot of connections. But their guesstimate is that there are 27 million people in the world living in sexual bondage. In other words, according to this group, there are 27 million abducted sex slaves in the world. Okay? That's a stunning, that's larger than some countries.
Yeah.
When what a stunning number. Now, I think that's a very low number. I think they're giving a low estimate, in my opinion.
Well, a lot of listeners in the developed world, a lot of our listeners, of course, in the United States would probably be shocked by that number. But when you look at the sorts of things that have come out about, well, United Nations troops and the way they take sexual advantage of people in places like Sudan, or the stories that came out some years ago during the 90s about, and the name of the company escapes me, but it was a contractor for the DynCorp in Bosnia, running a sex trade there of women from Eastern Europe. It's not really that implausible.
Oh, no, not at all. And they're a very good organization, and they are very, they got sociologists and psychologists to look into this. There's a lot of fundamentalist Christian groups who are affiliated with Not for Sale. It's not a Christian group itself, but it tends to attract Christian groups, and what they're trying to form is a kind of underground railroad for victims of sexual slavery. Set up safe houses for people who've been abducted or drawn into prostitution to have a place to go where the pimp can't get at them, where they can receive medical care and counseling, whatever they need to get their lives back on track. And it's a wonderful idea, and they've helped a lot of people. But when you look at the figure of 27 million, it's a Herculean task that they have before them. Their goal is to eliminate this, have a huge underground railroad. But when you consider that the head of Interpol, when asked about this human trafficking and sex slavery, said they lack the manpower to even put a slight dent in the huge numbers of people who are in sexual slavery. So,
well, it's like you said about the things being bought and sold through the magazines that you saw back during your time in San Francisco. If there wasn't a demand for it, there wouldn't be a supply.
Well, right. When you asked me earlier about all these abductions and things in, specifically California, and there's an acute problem there. I agree with you. There are hotspots for this. But when you look at the big picture of 27 million people, it becomes stunning.
Yeah.
It's far worse than the slavery we had in the United States in the 1850s. It's far, far worse than that. It's global. It's organized. And there's nobody doing very much to stop it.
Now, some people,
one group,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but now some people may take offense to that statement that this is worse than slavery, but and it is slavery. There's no question. There's obviously not a racial component to it. But getting back to what you mentioned earlier, you made reference to the multimedia section of your website, and I do want to point people to that because of the incredible amount of research that you've compiled into one place at williamhkennedy.com. Tell us about the kind of resources and documentation that you've put there for people to do their own research and see exactly how big this problem is.
Okay, number one, people who go to williamhkennedy.com, I guarantee you will see the best occult history webpage on the web. Why do I say that? Because what I've done, I've set up 10 different pages which are interrelated to a certain extent, primarily on occult, satanic, witchcraft, and metaphysical themes. And what I've done is I've categorized it. Like, for example, if you go to the occult history multimedia page, you'll find an index there which will take you to links to all the best documentary films on YouTube and Google and Daily Motion that deal with occult topics. You will get documentary films, audio clips, free ebooks, all for free. There's a few things for sale here or there, especially on the survivalist page there. But what you will get is links to the very best documentaries on the web. And, I've been compiling this and working on this every day for years and years and years. So I have hundreds and hundreds of hours of films on Satanism, witchcraft, divination. I have a big section on politics and the occult, how our leaders of the world are actually involved in esoteric and occult practices, like Tony Blair, Richard Nixon, we mentioned earlier, Ronald Reagan and his astrologer. Mm-hmm. So if people go to WilliamHKennedy.com, I guarantee them the best occult webpage on the net.
Now, you also host a radio show on the internet called Sphinx Radio, where you talk with a real interesting variety of guests, everybody from Gerald Casale of Devo, one of my favorite bands from back in the day, actually, to G. Gordon Liddy.
Right. Well, you know, what do G. Gordon Liddy and Jerry Casale, well, what do they have in common? Well, number one, they're both my friends, but apart from that, at Sphinx Radio, I consider it a free speech zone. And what I love to do is get people with very extreme and, you know, far out and even lunatic fringe views, give them a chance to say what they have to say in a non-judgmental manner. Now, just to give you another example, I had Mark Rudd on, who ran the Weather Underground in the 1960s, a terrorist group, quite frankly, or a bunch of bombers. And I've also had Tom Metzner, who's the head of White Aryan Resistance at one time, a right-wing neo-fascist group. Now, I should point out, Derek, I don't endorse everyone I have on my show, and I don't agree with everyone on my show, and I don't particularly like everyone I have on my show.
Well, I give you credit because I'm a little more selective with my guests than you are.
Well, the point of Sphinx Radio is certainly to explore the enigmas of the ages and the puzzles of the present, like I have there, but it's also a venue for free speech. And to be honest with you, Derek, if someone like Timothy McVeigh if someone had listened to him, if someone like me had listened to him, if he had some venue, I think he wouldn't have done what he did. Okay? And that's a big statement, I know. But when you look how alienated these people who turn to acts of violence, like that horrible man who killed a guard at the Holocaust Museum.
Right.
I mean, he was a man who no one would listen to.
Well, I don't need a lot of people on those white supremacist websites that were listening to him.
Well, he wasn't a big figure in the neo-Nazi. He was no Tom Metzner. He was no John DeNugent. He really didn't have any following, so to speak, nor did he have any major, no third party like Sphinx Radio ever asked him to come on.
Well, you know, you may have a point. My personal opinion is that guys like him and Metzner and McVeigh is that they were listening, and they were listening to voices coming from the wrong side.
Okay, I mean, Derek, Sphinx Radio it's provocative to everybody. A lot of people are infuriated that I have Mark Rudd on.
Well, no, that's not a problem. I'm not criticizing your decision to have them on, because I think it makes for the same reason that we watch or read about, watch videos about or read about the occult. It's not because we have an interest in joining the occult, but it's because we want to be aware of what they're thinking and how they're thinking, in order to be better informed and better protected against that kind of poisonous thought.
And when you take a guy like Tom Metzner, he's kind of a self-parody. And he's really harmless in the sense that no major person that I can see. I know he got in trouble for one thing that he allegedly provoked him. But when you take someone like, Ernst Zundel, the Holocaust denier, and I believe the Holocaust happened. I think 6 to 8 million people were deliberately butchered by the Germans. I'm not a Holocaust denier myself. But Ernst Zundel was a guy who lived between the United States and Canada for many years, never arrested for any crime, and he started to express Holocaust denial views, and the United States deported him back to Germany, rendition, and they threw him in jail. You know, and he's in jail as we speak for denying the Holocaust. Well, who do we go after next? Those moon landing lunatics? Remember one of them bothered John Glenn and got punched right in the nose?
Uh-huh.
You know, are we going to let those moon landing deniers go around and bother our former astronauts? Do we throw them in jail too?
Gee, I hope not.
Next, Derek. I mean, who? People who have radio shows that talk about Satanism and cause satanic panic. We can't have those people around talking.
That's a dangerous thought.
We'll be like the 80s again. There'll be a satanic panic.
That's right.
Because I talk about James River and Gerald Robinson. So my goal is certainly to test the parameters of free speech. And I have I have provocative guests on Sphinx Radio. But more or less, I really love our Constitution. And I really love the First Amendment to the Constitution. And I would rather give people a voice than stifle them or, have them thrown in jail in other countries because I don't like what they have to say.
No, I agree with you there. I agree with you there.
And I don't deny the Holocaust, and, I don't particularly like what Mark Rudd did in the 1960s. There's a lot I don't like, but the purpose of the show is for free speech. And I should say that the guests we're talking about are a very small number. Sphinx Radio. I have a lot of people who talk about ancient history. Robert Schock and Brad Tiger, people like that. And we talk about Atlantis. I mean, so it's not...
And that's why I wanted to ask you about that, Bill, because it is such a wide range of topics and viewpoints that you present on Sphinx Radio. In fact, and this is something that caught my eye, you've had a couple of very prominent skeptics on your show, and considering the type of research that you do, what was it like interviewing James the Amazing Randi, and forgive me, I've forgotten the name of the fellow who you just...
Dr. Michael Shermer?
Michael Shermer, right, yes, of Skeptic Magazine. What was it like talking with those guys, knowing that they essentially believe that all of your work is about a bunch of hoo-ha?
Well, they never said that specifically about my work, and I even tried to get Penn and Teller to debunk me, but Penn and Teller, this is for free on the Ritual Abuse page at williamhkennedy.com. You can see Penn and Teller cover the Catholic pre-sexual abuse scandal. They didn't have me on. They must have lost my phone number or something. But they did a case where they pretty much backed up Lucifer's lodge. And they said that the Pope, our current Pope, was running a pedophile ring, an international pedophile ring. So they confirmed what I had to say, the skeptical community. Now, as far as Dr. Shermer and James the Amazing Randi goes, they were nothing but nice to me. And there again, Derek, Sphinx Radio is first and foremost for free speech. I want a skeptic on my show. I want I want a creationist on my show, and I want an evolutionist on my show. I want a skeptic on my show, and I want a UFO abductee on my show. How people find this and interpret it. Well, my listeners, and I have about 30,000 a week with all the streaming stuff. I get a lot of feedback on hits. I get about 4,000 hits a day on my webpage. So people, I want them to make up their own minds about these matters. And I try and give both sides of an issue. So I'll have Mark Rudd on, and I'll have Russell Means on, the Native American activist who calls for violence against our government. And I will have John DeNugent on, who's a white separatist who thinks blacks and whites should keep away from each other. I will have these people on. I don't endorse them, but my listeners, I owe it to them to give them both sides of an issue and to give them people they pretty much won't hear anywhere else. And I even have some wonderful interviews. One I think everyone should listen to is with Professor Mark Juergensmeyer of UC Santa Barbara, and we talk about the psychology of religious violence in that episode, and just how these people like McVeigh and the original people who tried to blow up the World Trade Center, our conclusion, and it's a quite frightening thing, is that these people aren't too far away from the mainstream. You know, they've just blown a circuit and stepped over a line that a lot of people are hovering at. So, you know, I have a lot of material on Sphinx Radio, a lot of interesting material, and it's off-topic and offbeat and all those things. But I guarantee whether you agree with it, disagree with it, get angry, get happy, whatever, you will enjoy Sphinx Radio.
And you can find that at sphinxradio.com, which is also linked from Bill's website, which is williamhkennedy.com. And again, you'll find the research pages there, the multimedia pages with lots and lots of material about the occult, the paranormal, and some of his ebooks, including his writings on the occult from the last few years, a number of articles about the occult and his research, all available at williamhkennedy.com. And, of course, his books, the excellent Lucifer's Lodge, Satanic Ritual Abuse in the Catholic Church, and Satanic Crime, A Threat in the New Millennium. Bill, it's always interesting and always an education when we talk, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you, Derek. It's great to be in the bunker.
William H. Kennedy passed away, as I mentioned earlier, about 6 years ago, and so his website is now offline. Sadly, his podcast, Sphinx Radio, also no longer available online. His books, however, still available through Amazon.com. Lucifer's Lodge, Satanic Ritual Abuse in the Catholic Church, and Occult Crime, A Threat in the New Millennium. Again, both of those available at Amazon.com and recommended by us here at A View from the Bunker. We got plenty on the schedule ahead. Again, next week, we'll bring out archived interviews with Dr. Philip Sylvia, who's a science director for an archaeological dig at a site called Tal el Hammam. That is, he believes, and the leader of the archaeological dig, Dr. Stephen Collins, believes, the site of the biblical Sodom. We'll discuss the evidence, why they think it's so, and then we'll bring out an interview with David Roll, kind of a maverick Egyptologist who has put forward an alternate timeline that challenges the official history of the ancient Near East. So Sodom and the Exodus next Sunday night, June 9th, on the best of A View from the Bunker. As we continue our travels around the Middle East, we are preparing for some additional travel later in the year, as we will be hitting conferences hither and yon. The Defender Conference from SkyWatchTV sold out the first weekend in August, but sign up for streaming video is now live. You'll find that at defenderconference.com. The Sons of God Giants of Old Conference in Lubbock, Texas. Sharon and I will be there August 16th through the 18th, along with Dr. Judd Burton, Pastor Dan Crestman, and more. And we'll have more information as we get closer to that date. I am honored to serve again this year as the Master of Ceremonies for the True Legends Conference back in Branson, September 13th through the 15th at the Mansion Theater. The theme this year, Answering the Alien Question, featuring L.A. Marzulli, Steve Quayle, prominent ufologists like George Knapp, Richard Dolan, Chase Kletsky, and more, Timothy Alberino as well. For information and to register, gen6.com, GENSIX.com. The Unsealed Scroll Prophecy Conference, October 4th through 6th in San Antonio, and the Hear the Watchman Conference coming to California, the Hilton Irvine Orange County Airport, October 11th through 13th, 2019. Sharon and I at both of those. For information on the Unsealed Scroll Conference, unsealedscroll.org, and Hear the Watchman, of course, hearthewatchman.com. A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House, released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Our opening theme is Iron Bacon by Kevin MacLeod. His website is incompetech.com. Our announcer, DC Good. Remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.